welcome to everybody for joining Transform. You are in the Retail on the Edge session, and we're joined with retail industry experts who will help to discuss some key trends like IoT and AI at the edge, and to enhance the consumer experience and drive operational efficiencies in physical retail. So as you've all been here for probably a few minutes, we kind of started a little bit early. We are missing one panelist. We're having just a bit of an audio issue. As soon as Siobhan from Dell, Siobhan Lynch from Dell arrives, we'll go ahead and cycle her in. But maybe we can just start off with a couple of quick introductions from our friends from Intel and Microsoft. That'd be great. Maybe Chris?
Sure. Chris Timmins. I work in Intel's Internet of Things group, and I focus, I work across a lot of verticals, but I focus a lot on retail and a lot on all of the infrastructure and open source technologies that make the edge look a whole lot like the cloud.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm George Moore in the Azure Edge Devices team. So our team focuses upon Edge AI, specifically in retail, as one of the target markets. And so I've been in the Azure team since its inception in 2006. And been doing Edge AI in retail for about the last 4 years.
Great. Again, I'm Tom Martell. I'm with ZEDEDA. I'm going to be helping to moderate. I do have a retail analytics background. Hopefully I can help with a little bit of input. As we were talking about just before we went live, talking about the biggest overall trends we're kind of seeing in the retail space, both in terms of challenges and opportunities. Maybe Chris, we could kind of rehash a little bit and talk about what you're seeing in the retail space, both as, like you said, challenge and what opportunities have presented themselves. And we'll talk about some of the factors that may be driving that.
Yeah, happy to. It's actually a good point, because just right before everybody came on in, George and I were actually bantering back and forth about this. So it was a pretty good conversation. So I really think there's kind of two things that we see going. We see kind of, you can I guess break them up into front of house and back of house. Front of house being a lot of the consumer engagement, or making sure that your enterprise can meet the ever-changing demands of consumers, and especially in the era of COVID, how those things have actually rapidly evolved. So anything from more robust online ordering, which can, for your traditional retailer, end up with, hey, I want to buy it online, I want to pick up in store. No, I want it shipped to me. I want to return it wherever the heck I want to whatever store I want to. All of those type things, which I think have really become table stakes for everyone. And then, you can think of the back of the house stuff around how am I, squeezing out efficiencies to make these things in the front of the house possible. And they're not always easy to do. So some of them, we see some of our retail partners who are really just human gluing a lot of this stuff together to start with, but they want to, kind of, I would say, aggressively move to how do they continue to automate this stuff. And I think George probably knows more about it than I do, but a lot of deployment of AI. How do I use AI to squeeze out all the efficiency I possibly can, or AI to just help meet these consumer expectations of what it is. So that's a lot of what we're seeing. Is, I would say, there's kind of a natural split there. They also, I think we were chatting about this too, that a lot of the front of the house consumer engagement stuff, on the very first parts of it, it can be kind of a lost leader for you. You're not going to make money with it. It's not going to increase margins. Where really some of the back of the house stuff can help you squeeze out some inefficiencies and drive some margin benefit to make up for what you're seeing on the front of the house, until you can turn that business profitable or make that potential delivery part of it possible.
That's great. George?
Sure, absolutely. We're actually seeing that, again, because of COVID and the general movement towards more digital channels, that the need to have the ground truth of what's actually happening in the store, whether it's the front of the house, inventory controls, consumer tracking, consumer behaviors, occupancy scenarios, path to spend, heat maps, aisle congestion, in-cap effectiveness, queue lengths. Those sorts of things are really top of mind, and inventory management are really top of mind for retailers. And the back of the house, it's both in the receiving portions of the loading dock, understanding which pallets are unloaded at what time, the actual inventory positions in the back of the store, but also it goes way deeper back into the production lines, the manufacturing facilities, and the distribution centers, and understanding truck loading patterns, and are the trucks packed efficiently, and how long does it take to load a truck versus unload a truck. And back in the manufacturing space, defect detection, understanding the efficacy of your manufacturing line and preventive maintenance on the manufacturing line. So it really spans the whole, everything from manufacturing to distribution, shipping, logistics, receiving, and eventually the front of the house that you see in the actual retail stores that you visit.
I was thinking there was one more, and George, maybe you've seen some of this too. Anybody who's stood up self-checkout, as they've seen people move from, your normal kind of cashier-based lane to much more traffic in the self-checkouts across grocery and across some of, I would say more, typical apparel and stuff. We've also seen large deployments of, AI for fraud detection.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anti-shrink, anti-shoplifting,
Yep.
Anti-theft specifically in the self-checkout is top of mind for the retailers, because retailers obviously want to reduce their labor cost by moving to more automated checkouts, that instead of having paid checkout lanes, man checkout lanes, and move to self-checkout. But they have to balance that against the anti-shrink that they have to deploy, and how efficient is the anti-shrink, how much products can actually catch. And then there's the follow-on question: even if they catch someone in the middle of a transaction, how do you defuse the situation? How do you actually stop or halt the transaction so that you're able to both detect it and deal with the consequences?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. A good anecdote is we had one of our grocery store partners, a small regional player, said, "I don't know what people are taking, but I know I've been selling more bananas than I'm purchasing."
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's true. So that's interesting you bring that up. Is you've seen so many changes. The retailers are changing to address the changing consumer, and now we've got obviously dealing with COVID. And as we kind of turn the corner from this, what do you see as kind of the lasting effects of any of these new opportunities? Like Chris, you'd mentioned self-checkout, and what changes do you think are instituted in physical retail that you think will last, and which ones do you think will just go away over time?
I think one of the things that we're watching closely to see what happens is there's a lot of automation going in, some of it going to self-checkout, all that kind of stuff, because of labor shortages. And I don't know that we really know when these labor shortages are actually going to sort themselves out. Is it just that potentially these weren't attractive jobs and people had moved on to other stuff and they don't plan on coming back to them? Do we have to wait till, there's a shift in some younger people entering the workforce to start making up for this stuff? So I think a lot of the automation that's been deployed to help with the labor shortage or optimization of labor that's in the store, I think it's here to stay, because retailers of all sorts, you can think about that all the way from, your apparel retailer to your quick serve restaurant, to even a lot of, for anybody who's done a little bit of traveling through this, there's multiple hotel chains that you can do everything yourself. You never actually you don't have to interact with anybody in the building other than, you can check in at a kiosk, you can get your key on your phone, and you can settle up your mini bar, whatever else you've done, and you can just walk right out. Mm-hmm. And I think you're going to see, I think some of that stuff is absolutely here to stay, because I think there's so much uncertainty in the labor market.
Absolutely. I think that the durability of these solutions is going to last, because I've also hearing from our OEM and silicon providers that there's just intense amount of new deployments exactly for these kiosk situations in both restaurants and hotels and other places, due primarily to labor shortages. Mm-hmm. And so it's created this sort of virtuous cycle where the consumer starts to expect or want to have, in some cases, these digital interactions, because they can meet the demand, or the company can meet the demand of the customers whenever and whatever the customers arrive, and not have to you can actually get a more personalized experience in some cases. So yeah. I do believe these are going to be long-lasting effects.
And I think the other one that I think will be around is due to the supply chain issues. We've seen a lot of deployment of AI around optimization of food, inputs in in quick serve restaurants to really try to reduce as much waste as they can, because they've got such, there's a lot of supply chain issues. So it might be that, if you're in a place where, any type of self-serve place where you're walking up, you're telling them what to put in, it could be a pizza, burrito, whatever it is. They used to rely on, kind of the experience of the manager who'd be like, oh, wait, we need more pepperoni. Someone go slice more pepperoni right now. Well, what we've seen is large amounts of that. Now they're installing cameras over those things. They're monitoring the depth of these trays. And then they've got all the sales from before. They know the traffic patterns, and they're mapping that stuff back to, here's when you actually need more pepperoni, because they don't want to throw anything out that they don't have to because of the supply chain issues. I think that stuff's absolutely here to stay as well.
Absolutely. And that's just another part of the supply chain, essentially reducing safety stock. Knowing when to slice the right number of pepperonis is the very end of the safety stock problem of the supply chain. So this is really manifesting all the way up and down the supply chain.
Yeah. I was, maybe I'll throw this one back to George. I was trying to think of one that's transient, that was here for COVID, that we think will go away. And I'm kind of like, I haven't talked to a lot of partners who are like, we're just deploying this as a stopgap and we intend to get rid of it. So I'm struggling to think of a good example. I don't know, George, if you have one of what we think might be a transient technology.
Not really. I mean, I've talked to a lot of retailers, both at QSRs, grocers, hotels, others, and a lot of things that they originally deployed thinking, oh yeah, this is just something we're going to do temporarily, has turned into something that consumers expect and that they demand now.
Yeah, and once the consumers are satisfied with it and they get used to consumption in that model. Actually, wait, I think I've got one. We have one QSR partner in Europe who deployed substantial amounts of kiosks, and they kind of really thinned out the support on the cash register side. And they have found in the parts of the country that have more an elderly population, that they've had to go back and put more cashiers in, because some of the folks who didn't grow up with this type of technology and know how to order, it turns out that it's actually much slower for them to use it than to actually just tell someone what they want. So I think maybe, but that to me is fine tuning. They're not removing the kiosk, by the way.
Yeah, that's not going away. It's interesting because a lot of the larger retailers were in this whole automation initiative 2-3 years ago, right? They most of them have already made the shift, and they had good timing on it. And the concern was it was going to be replacing the interactive, the people, the touch factor, right? And now you've found that employees don't want to. So I think it's here to stay for two reasons. The consumers are demanding it, right, because of the efficiency, and employees don't want to work in those jobs anymore, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Question then, for the retailers that haven't made this change, right? George, you were talking about this the other day, that a lot of what stops them from engaging or beginning the process is the infrastructure need and the underestimation of what the infrastructure requirements are to undertake these initiatives. Can you talk a little bit about how you think a retailer could start this? Where do they start? Where does somebody start if they want to go down this path?
Well, I do agree that there's a lot of infrastructure that is just deficient in many areas. I mean, like I talked to some retailers whose stores are connected by a single T1 line, which is 1.4 megabits per second, which is really not adequate for modern commerce, where you have a lot of, especially cloud offload of analytics and deeper things you can do in the cloud. And so being able to modernize the back end, where they may be running 3, 4, 5-year-old systems that are in some cases 10-year-old systems, where there's a collection of different virtualization environments from different providers, just disentangling that and being able to modernize that, bring it forward to more modern containerized deployments to ease and lower the cost of manageability is, in some cases, step one. The other big problem is that as they're starting to, even if they are up to speed, but especially if they're not up to speed on the current infrastructure, the data models and being able to stitch together these disparate systems provided from different vendors and be able to understand what stock on hand may be in different providers' data models is a huge challenge for a lot of these retailers.
Yeah, I think I'll kind of pull that thread a little more. One of the things that we see is, or one thing, well, I'll give you a couple anecdotes we've heard from partners. One is a gas station convenience store chain in the U.S. And their CIO told us, look, I used to have like 6 pieces of silicon in a store. And that was essentially, I had like a gas pump controller. I had a couple point of sale systems. She's like, at last count, I had over 50 pieces of silicon in a store. And she's like, that type of growth, that where I've solved every single business need with kind of a piecemeal type solution, she goes, I can't continue that kind of exponential growth because the management of those systems is crazy. And
Right.
some of them, and she said, some of these solutions we bought have their own management stuff that's built. And so now I have a one-off for a single use case that I have to manage through a pane of glass that is unique to just that. And she's like, look, and her infrastructure isn't modern enough, as George pointed out, where it doesn't look anything like the cloud, where it's just containers and you can move them around, spin up servers, spin down servers. They don't have any of that. She's like, hey, I'm trying to get my application providers to modernize, but typically what they want me to do is write them a big check to do it. And so she wants partners like Intel, and I'm assuming partners like Microsoft, to help incentivize some of these folks to move to a more modern architecture where, hey, and I'm not saying they'll end up with a micro cloud in every store, but there will be plenty of them that do. I think that's actually the next big transition that's going to happen. All of these piecemeal gateways are going to go away, and it's going to collapse down to thicker compute that's just significantly more manageable. And so I think that's where we see there's a lot of transition going on in that space, in that infrastructure, and that's going to be a painful transition for some retailers. For others, not so much. A lot of retailers, more progressive retailers, had taken, I would say, a cloud-first approach. Hey, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put every single thing in the cloud I possibly can. And then over time, I will migrate back down to the store stuff where I find use cases that require me to have, an on-premise compute node. And then I want to start to consolidate down the compute I do have on-prem. So I think that's the infrastructure one that, that's going to be a long-term cycle for folks to get through that, because there's a lot of changes in the ecosystem that have to happen to enable that.
Right, I would agree. And even in that example where you have relatively thick amounts of compute running in the back of the store, the next frontier, the next problem that people are starting to see is the vertical silos of, in some cases, top to bottom silicon to services that are bound together as one cohesive unit. Mm-hmm. And you wind up with duplicate costs. A great example would be a robotic floor cleaner. There are companies that make robotic floor cleaners. They go out at night, they have a GPU, the robot runs around the store, kind of like a giant Roomba. It cleans the floor, and as a byproduct, it produces a map of the store. But that GPU that's bound to that robot is only used at night. And in the daylight, the GPU is just sitting there idle. And so the company's paid the CapEx to build and have this GPU that is idle 12 or 14 hours of the day and only used at night. Meanwhile, there's another separate GPU being used for the anti-shoplifting technologies that's in the front of the store, but that's only active during the day when the store is open. So how do you start to be able to have hardware reuse where you can start to move these workloads across and share core assets like a GPU, expensive assets like a GPU?
Yeah, I think the other one's interesting on there, George. I don't know if you've heard this from many folks, is one of the things that we've heard repeatedly too is, hey, I may install a particular piece of hardware to solve a particular business problem, and I don't even actually get the raw data. I get a report. That's all I get. So I can't do any type of fusion because they actually provide me no data. And
right, because the provider has some sort of SaaS application and only get some sort of browser-based UI that lets you view whatever attribute you may have. Oh, and Siobhan's joined us. This is great.
Hi, Siobhan. No audio.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So
This
for
a very fine mime act.
Yeah. I was going to say, I couldn't think of Marcel Marceau fast enough. Dating myself, but It's interesting. That's, you talk about that. You talk about these kind of like the bossa nova kind of floor cleaners that, run by LiDAR, and they clean the floor at night. And they started to, I've seen retailers that have implemented spill technology to try to understand, using that same robot, can I use it for another application that can be used during the day? And I think that's kind of interesting. Are you guys seeing, what are some of like the other either multi-use or killer applications that retailers are evaluating, or what kind of issues are they trying to solve that you think solutions might be out there that they have either overlooked or should be evaluating, or anything killer you're seeing out there?
Well, I just say the number one problem for most mass market retailers is out of stock. Mass market retailers lose an industry average of 8.1% of their sales to out of stock. You go to the store to buy Cheerios, there's no Cheerios on the shelf. So there's just a huge amount of activity and a huge opportunity to be able to effectively solve the out of stock problem. And a lot of the leading trends are being able to use cameras or other video sensors as the universal sensor to do out of stock deployment or out of stock detection. And but then you get into camera placement and management of the cameras, and are they wall powered or battery? There's just a huge complexity that still exists today, but the opportunity, as I said, is huge if someone can actually solve this.
Yeah, I think we see something very similar. I mean, I think the big trend is video everywhere, and I would really separate that between China and rest of the world. I mean, if you go to China, it's so amazingly prevalent everywhere. I can't remember, I'll probably get the numbers wrong, but I think the year before COVID started, I think China deployed 275 million cameras in the country. I mean, a staggering amount of video, and a staggering amount of video processing, and then analytics on top of that. So I think you'll see, by the way, they also benefit from, obviously there's difference in privacy rules between China and the rest of the world. I think you'll start to see some of those use cases that get built out in retail in China, which we actually see is, one, they're unencumbered by a lot of technical debt that some of their Western peers are. So they're much more willing to go install these things, try them, and see how they work, because they don't have to integrate them into 15 systems that have been there for 10 years.
Right.
So I think that's where you're going to start to see more of these video applications. I mean, you see stuff like, I don't know, I haven't been to China, since COVID started. But, I think it's amazing that you can go into a restaurant, you can open WeChat, you can order in WeChat, your food will come, you can pay in WeChat.
Yes.
And it all gets divvied up on the back end with the restaurant. You can leave tips for people, all of that stuff, all in a single app while you're sitting at your table.
Wow.
And you can split your bill up and all of that. To me, and the stuff around, we also saw the Homo, which is kind of a equivalent to like a Whole Foods, in the US. They actually have a grocery cart that will follow you around. You don't have to push. You just put a little wristband on, and this thing in a grocery cart just follows you around.
That's pretty cool.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So I think we're going to see more of that technology start to bleed out, and I think you'll have to wait and see what. I think the big one in the U.S. will be what does Amazon do with the whole Go concept, and continuing to push on that. So I think those are where you're going to see those consumer-facing things that just continue to remove friction between the retailer and your wallet. That's really what it's about.
Yeah.
And, while delivering an experience that you're like, hey, I really appreciate that, I like it, or it makes my life easier, more convenient. So I think that's where you're going to see it. And that's where we see. By the way, if you go look at it, that's where all the VC money is flowing right now too, right? It's predominantly tons of dollars flowing into VC or startups focused on all types of video.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah. Well, you think, the biggest edge footprints is the home, right? And Amazon has dominated that relationship with the consumer for years. What do you think it's going to take for retailers to kind of break into the home with their own offerings, and that they're enabled by edge and IoT tech?
I think this is a tricky one. I think essentially they're going to have to partner with people. Yeah. I don't know that you're going to see a retailer. You might see a novel retailer who comes up with a home thing that works really well. But I think for the bulk of it, you're going to see, you're going to see these things. People are going to be building on top of, in the U.S., whatever Amazon, Microsoft, and Google are offering as their platforms to get you there,
Right.
because you're going to need a pipe to get there, and most of that's going back to the cloud, and those are the three big cloud providers here. So, candidly, I think that's how it's going to kind of play out.
But I also would not underestimate the fact that in many cases, people just don't trust, let's say, e-commerce providers to deliver fresh produce, fresh meats, fresh bananas, and that you're incentivized to want to go to your local grocer to pick out your actual bananas or the perfect slice of chicken breast or whatever that may be. So there's still a huge push for people to want to get out of their house and actually go and pick for themselves. And that's going to be a really difficult problem for a lot of the e-commerce providers to really solve.
It'll be interesting. It'll be just interesting to see how the demographic shifts, because historically the younger generations have always wanted to handle everything electronic, on e-commerce, and now, I mean, I have kids in their 20s and they can't wait to get out and physically go into a store, and so it's interesting.
I will say, I don't think it's not like you haven't seen people be successful in this, right? You had Blink. You've had Simply Safe, all those on the security, and oh god, now I actually even have one of them. The doorbell company that Amazon purchased. I'm spacing on their name right now.
Ring. Yeah.
I mean, all of those people built footprint, in the home of their own accord. So it's not that it's not possible. I think almost all of them have been acquired by somebody now, to kind of, because I think it's tough to scale off of that one unique thing without having kind of a platform type concept to deliver other services on top of it. So I think the home's a tricky endeavor for a lot of these people.
Yeah. Agreed, though. I think it's going to be it'll be a partnership. It'll take that. So we had a question on the Q&A tab, and I think one of them, I think we'd addressed it, was COVID related, the changes due to COVID. But there was another one that said, any examples of platforms, applications, services being used more holistically?
Well, I see. Here's what we see is, I would say that when we think of those, we have lots of end users who work extensively with Microsoft and all of their edge offerings. So it's like, hey, I've got, George probably knows the names better than I do, but hey, I've got my Azure IoT Edge stuff. I've got my Azure Stack. I've got all that. I really want stuff to interact with that because, Microsoft just being one of the CSPs, by the way, to offer those things. But I want that single pane of glass that allows me to connect a bunch of stuff up. I can manage it. I can deploy it. I've got my hosted Kubernetes to bring down all my containers and do all that, and be it, heavy edge to light edge, whatever you want. I think those are the best examples I see of, and retailers are highly aligned with the CSPs of their choice.
That's right. I mean, if you actually look at IDC's projections over the next 5 years, IDC is showing that although there's $300 billion being spent by the hyperscale cloud providers just to build out their cloud infrastructure, there's an estimated $1.5 trillion of IT spending going to be happening at the edge, primarily driven by data locality, data sovereignty, and latency. And so having the ability of holistically approaching this, effectively $1.5 trillion spend between modernizing your IT infrastructure, like moving to modern software-based networks, software-based storage is a huge, there's a huge category of investment happening there. There's IoT, like in the retail case, specifically integrating small lightweight IoT devices for HVAC systems, coolers, other sensors within the retail store, and then also being able to hook up and control the AI pieces in a very holistic manner is increasingly becoming a requirement by many of these businesses, because they don't want to have separate security models. They don't want to have separate compliance models, separate manageability models. They want a single pane of glass.
Yep. I think that, and George, you kind of poked on this earlier, was, we also see, some looking at that next stage of software defined infrastructure, right? Much as you said that, hey, at one point in time, it does this, I got my servers up and running, my point of sale software, but when the store's closed, why do I still have those containers up? Why can I not drop those and turn it into an analytics engine to process a bunch of data that I collected during the day? And then as the morning comes back up, the containers come back up, my point of sales are back up, everything's fine, but I've used it, but now I've reduced the total amount of infrastructure I need because it's all shared resources. And so I think we see a lot of thinking in that space as well.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Right. We had one more pop up. I'm not sure who would like to address it. It says, do you see an opportunity for open sourced Eve OS at the edge in retail? So I guess retailers adopting Eve.
Sorry, from an OS perspective, I mean,
yeah, from an OS perspective,
Linux has pretty much won a lot of the the IoT workloads, except in areas where there is larger regulatory or compliance areas, where in that case Windows IoT is really strong. But certainly Linux, lightweight Linux containers, lightweight Linux OS running in small lightweight devices is by far and away the preferred way that most people are wanting to go build their IoT infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. Appreciate you guys taking the time to break away from your busy schedules and spend a few minutes with us and to talk about retail at the edge. Any final thoughts? I'm trying to think if there's anything that we've missed along the way.
I just think that we've seen a lot of change in the last 18 months, and I think we're going to see. I don't think the pace of that change is going to slow down.
No, not at all.
That's interesting. You think it'll continue? It'll continue at this fast, hyper pace.
I think for the foreseeable future, I think change will be the biggest thing there is. And I think you're just going to see all of the stuff around. We see lots of people working on all the VR, AR stuff. How does that get implemented? But all of the further, I don't even think like the whole contactless stuff has rolled out everywhere, all these places. So the market's still got lots of consumption to do. We were talking about this before the meeting, and that's not just walking up and paying on a terminal. That's all the stuff where you now have, hey, if there's a QR code at the bottom of your receipt, you can just scan that QR code, pay with your phone. There's no terminal needed. Your phone is the payment terminal.
Right.
That I've only seen a very few places. But it's very prevalent in China, all of those types of things. So I think what you're going to see is that's going to get implemented all across the Western. And the pace of that stuff I don't think it's going to slow down. I think there's still so much work to do.
Yeah. Well, to your point,
it's being driven by these external factors around supply chain and labor shortages and such that are not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to your point, Chris, I get we'll all be watching to see how the Go stores. How they work out, because there are others doing the same thing, right? So,
yep,
yeah. We already addressed that. So, the killer application on the edge that excites you. So, is there an application, an edge application that excites you most personally?
I would just say video AI for me. I mean, that's just video as the universal sensor is just super exciting from what you can do, and just really the amount of interest and the investment being made by academia and everyone in terms of new AI models and advancement in that space is just incredibly rapid.
Yeah, I agree with George. I think it's all about, video and video everywhere, and how do you make use of that video? How do you, there's a lot of, by the way, there's the application is the video and potentially the AI. But I think there's actually, believe it or not, there's lots of companies working on. It's still painful to go screw 100 cameras into the wall.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you automate the onboarding, the provisioning, the management of those cameras, the data flows, and not have to do repeat that cycle if you take a camera down and move it 10 feet, and then all of a sudden your system thinks it's a completely different camera. So So to me, there's all the stuff around how do you extract value out of it, but then how do you reduce the complexity of actually deploying it? And you need those to actually work in lockstep, or else the market there's a lot of sand in the gears to get everything moving.
Right.
So I think you're going to see that on both sides of it when you come to video.
Great. Again, appreciate I think we've hit all the Q&As there that came through. Appreciate both of you guys' time. And if anyone has any follow-on questions, you can either send them on to any of us, and we'll catch you back offline and get you in touch with either Chris, George, or myself. Thanks again for joining, and I hope you all have a good balance of the day.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you, guys.